So many stories were following the major ones. Here's the latest in the heart of the troubles of the PDP. Uche Secondos from the South-South zone is to vacate the seat of chairman of the PDP. The party book says is the turn of the Northeast. How will this affect the opposition party? Also, Olisa Metu, the National Publicity Secretary of the PDP, accuses the ruling APC of attempts to silence him in a desperate move to hammer the final nail on the PDP coffin. What are your thoughts? Also, the Federal High Court in Abuja grants bail to the former National Security Advisor, Colonel Sambo Dasuki, and 4 others standing trial for alleged money laundering and criminal breach of trust. It's not the first time this is happening, though. What will be the next chapter of Dasuki? Tweeted Gimba003. Let's know your thoughts on the subject. Security concerns extends to the northwest in Kaduna State. Zakzaki gets on the wrong side of the government. An alleged attack was staged by Islamic Movement of Nigeria on the convoy of the Chief of Army Staff, Major General Tukur Buratai. There are growing concerns and fears that the Shiite group may stage reprisal attacks. What if the situation snowballs beyond what Boko Haram is doing in the northeast? Will the military be able to contain it? Data feeds still coming through in one place simultaneously. We'll focus on a few of them. It's prime time in Lagos. This is State of the Nation. We want to welcome everyone in Nigeria and the rest of the world. I'm Gimba Umar. This is State of the Nation. Data feed still coming through in one place simultaneously. Right behind me, channelstv.com, youtube.com/channelsweb, where you can follow all our top stories live on our social media platforms. Trending. It's probably one of the biggest stories with regards to Nigeria's election climate that seems to be done every other month since the beginning of this administration. The latest information is that Rivers State will go through the process again. I had a talk with Professor Fidelis Odita, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, on what this means for the country and the people of the state, among other pressing concerns in the nation. Take a listen. Professor Fidelis Odita, I want to thank you so much indeed for joining us on State of the Nation. Let's begin with the political situation in Rivers State, as the courts have already made their pronouncements that there should be a rerun of the elections there. What do you make of this?
What took place in Rivers State cannot be described as an election. So it is entirely proper that the courts should send them back to the electorate to enable the electorate to express their own will and their own choice as to who should govern them. The difference between a military regime and a civil regime is that in the civil regime, the electorates elect their leaders, and it is that mandate that gives the leaders legitimacy. Analytically, there is no difference between an election that is obtained by fraud or marred by violence on one hand, and a coup d'etat. In a coup, power is acquired by violence through the gun. In a flawed election, power is acquired by fraud. In both cases, the mandate is vitiated because the will of the people is not present. So it is entirely fitting that the courts should send the people of Rivers State back to their polling units, because frankly what happened, as far as we could see from the television, was a disgrace. It's not capable of being described as an election.
What do you make of this situation? Does the zoning of the PDP from the south-south now to the northeast, does this in any way weaken the structure of the PDP going into the elections in Rivers State?
It shouldn't. The PDP itself is a party that makes rules which it has little intention of complying with. It wrote zoning into its own constitution. And you'd have thought that for a party that is pretending to be a political party and trying to put people forward for elective office, that the least it could do is to comply with its own constitution. But as we've seen in the past 16 years, especially through their primaries and the selection of their officers, they have never followed their own constitution. Little wonder that they did not follow Nigerian law for the most part. If the constitution of PDP provides that it's the turn of Northeast to produce a chairman, why should they have someone who is acting for more than almost 6 months? How long does it take to call a special convention to elect a replacement chairman when Alhaji Maozu retired or resigned or was forced to go following the electoral debacle. So it is entirely proper that the courts should make them obey their own rules and not to allow them to say that questions of politics are beyond the courts, because that's where they used to take refuge in the past, by saying these are political questions, they are not justiciable. But everything appears now to be justiciable, and there's no reason why they shouldn't comply with their own constitution.
Do you suppose that this is too close a time, considering that River State is going into election, to have this?
Yes, they should go back to the people. If you won before because your people love you, they should love you again and re-elect you. But what cannot happen, and indeed I'm a little disappointed with the court. I think that the courts have not sacked enough governors, because in many states, the elections are rigged. And the fact that many of these tribunals uphold rigged elections encourages politicians in future to rig, because there is no downside. If you don't rig, you lose. If you rig, the chances are the courts or the tribunal will keep you, and if they don't keep you, you go back and have a re-election. At least you have a second chance. But for many of them, at the time that they are being called to have a re-election or a second election, they have access to state resources which they misuse routinely to fund their own elections. So the system is very deeply flawed. We need to do something about that, and to encourage the tribunals to enforce our electoral laws and not to allow people to get away with rigged and flawed elections.
Does Olisa Metu have the basis to make those kind of pronouncements that he made, saying that the APC is out to grab, as it were, the states that belong to the PDP, talking about the strong states of River State, of Delta State, of Akwa Ibom State, for example? Does he have the moral justification to make those claims?
I believe he doesn't have any basis at all for his statements, which are somewhat incautious. Taking first the question of the acquisition of states by the APC, it's very disrespectful to Nigerians to say that where elections are held and a party other than the PDP wins, there is an acquisition by APC. But even if one were to assume that APC is acquiring some of those states, in any civilized system, a party like the PDP that has brought untold suffering to Nigerians, and you only need to look around yourself in Nigeria today to see the untold hardship which Nigerians suffer, that alone justifies their being kicked out of office, wherever they are. So to say that the APC is coming to acquire, I think is somewhat disingenuous. But apart from that, since the PDP has failed to rule properly, and we hear scandals about $2.1 billion, about $630 billion, and they're just talking about humongous amounts which were misused. Even President Buhari told us this week that President Jonathan abused the public trust in the way he used the security vote, and there is some evidence to support that, if the revelations that we have been regaled with in the last 2 weeks are anything to go by. In relation to APC being out to get Mr. Metu, I do not believe that the APC arrests people or indicts people without any basis. The APC is not the police. The APC is not the EFCC. Those institutions existed under PDP regime. If there is a prima facie evidence of wrongdoing, of course, the least you expect the law enforcement authorities to do is to investigate the crime. If, for example, Mr. Metu received part of the security vote from the Asuki, as a lawyer, he ought to know that the security votes cannot be used for party purposes. And so for anyone to invite him to answer questions in relation to such misuse of public monies is entirely a proper use of the law.